So, and also VFX needs reference to particular images in stack for sure.
The more capability I have to randomize things and order things, the better, especially when I'm doing, even if it's not really a flip book, it's just like pick from this set of images randomly, or always pick these 3 in a row randomly, that kind of stuff. That really makes.
Let's call it an image set and make it the basic building block of all VFX, because we don't want VFX also referencing regular images, because that's a lot of special case code. So just have image stacks of 1 if you only need 1 sprite, or image sets of 1.
Okay.
The other thing
So
is,
we won't reference a particular image. We'll always reference an image set.
Yep.
Even if this set is only 1D.
And then we can randomly select from within an image set, or animate from within an image set. It just toggles in the VFX.
what I was going to add is that this is probably a topic for another meeting, but there will probably need to be some kind of crossover for effects between. There are basically 2 kinds of effects that you have in games. There are the ones which are more like pure energy kind of things, which are purely abstract, and then there are the more physical things. So there's going to have to be some crossover between, like, when I summon a whatever it is, some of that might have to use some more straight modeling kind of materials, or something that looks close enough so that it doesn't have to be the whole PBR thing, but it has to look similar.
You need to be able to throw a rock and it looks like a rock.
Or I summon a chair or a log or whatever.
Falls under the broader category of, well, there are 2 things in there. Number 1, the ability to have things other than sprites come out of VFX.
Yeah.
And number 2, the ability to do lit VFX that interact with the lighting.
Yep.
Even if it's not full PBR, just making them, like, because some of the stuff, like, oh, that water effect looks so great, and when the sun is shining on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, the minute
then, you do it at night, and it looks like the sun is, still shining on it.
That's what
So that's why I had my normal map up there.
I've had a lot of luck with VFX systems just defining a lit version of a particle and an unlit version of a particle, and then offsetting them by the sun direction, rendering twice. And it looks like volumetric particles, volumetric fog when it's done right.
Can you draw that?
It's can I draw it? Sure, why not?
In the sun direction. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, you have a lit particle, dark particle.
No, down lower.
Okay. I can't see myself.
Yeah.
Let me get rid of all my maths. Okay, lit particle, dark particle, sunlight direction, sun.
Yeah, we do have some rich colors in there too, though, so we definitely want to turn smoke golden at sunset and things like that too. So
yeah, well, we could apply actual lighting to the lit version and then shadow the non-lit version, and it gives you volumetric shadow effect without the cost of actually calculating any of that. I mean, it's really low tech solution, yeah. But
I like how glorious
it play games.
It is. It's kind of spectacularly low tech.
Yep. It's terribly low tech. And you can I've played around with the blending modes on it to get the light one to basically dodge the dark one, etc., and make that look good. I can't remember exactly how I did it because it's been like 6 years now since I last implemented it, but
Was this in Shadow of Mordor?
No, Shadow of Mordor was all high tech.
Shadows of Mordor.
Yeah.
Still, cool. That's a neat idea.
So anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on all the material stuff yet because that's not even in my top 5.
Okay.
But I was trying to think of the quickest. Well, I put the sprite thing at the beginning just because that is a fundamental thing. The whole Atlas problem is a fundamental undergird for the way that text work that will make my life a lot easier. So that's why I made that one number 1. But the other ones that are on top 5, except like 4 and 5, are I think easier things to do. They're more straightforward.
Yeah. So additional particle rotation and orientation. Can you give me? Let's enumerate these. Let's just crunch through.
Okay, well, I haven't thought of every possible combination, but like basically what you want to do is you will have a particle and then be able to lock certain axes or have it spin on certain axes so that hey, fix this.
No, that's the Twitch camera. I'm getting cross on the George camera.
Yeah, I'm on the George cam.
Yeah, that's the George cam. That George sees through there.
Okay.
Twitch sees through there.
So, real simple stuff. I'm sure you've seen it a million times. Particle systems. Here's the sprite.
Yeah, I was gonna say use the paper.
You just need to be able to lock it on certain axes. So I want it to go like if the way I think of particles is I always think X, Y,
Yeah,
UV, whatever. And so if the particle is like a directional particle, I want to lock it on the y-axis so that it spins this way.
Lock it to whatever it's emitting.
Yeah,
from, right.
right. And then we can do the camera-facing magic like this. Or in some cases, I want a particle so that it's going to be locked to be always kind of ground-facing for like particles which shoot out from your feet, or at least at some kind of shallow angle, so they're coming out like
We
this.
can lock them to an axis and then turn on and off camera facing to get both of those. Give you an axis for each one of the emitters.
Yeah, like if you look at some of the other engines that are out there and look at their settings for a particle locking, it has all of the combinations. And some of them are more useful than others, and I can go through the list and
understand.
sort out the ones. But basically, that's the 2 big ones are just like whether it's camera facing and then being able to lock it in certain ways. For instance, like I might want a whole bunch of particles which shoot out for me, but I actually want to I want them to align on Z like this.
Align on
So
world Z or align on C
local,
for the emitter, or
local Z.
that's
So,
the
so it's like I want to make a dome of particles.
right.
So IZ, yeah.
And they're all like, and each particle is like tangent to the surface of the sphere.
Yeah, so pretty much need to control the alignment relative to
Yeah.
Local.
relative to local.
Yeah.
There's not a lot called to align to world X or Y.
No.
You align to world Z or not world
Yeah,
Z.
no, from the emitter, from whatever its emitter.
You oftentimes align to world Y is fairly useful.
World Y is north.
Yeah, well, world up. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's why I said there's not a lot called to align to anything but world Z. World Z is the only world access we want to lock.
Yeah, we have the concept of the elevation, which is the absolute.
but laser effects and stuff require aligning to an arbitrary axis as well.
Yes.
And in some cases, you want particles which can be totally free flipping, so that I can make leaves and things like that, so that they can rotate around all of the axes.
Yeah. So let's enumerate this. Flat, align to X, Y, Z of local emitter space. Also, Dave, did you ever put in the code for align to the particle's velocity?
There is code in there. I'm not sure if I think Cross had some things he wants to change on it. So
Yeah, it currently sort of works. It just there are just some issues I think with how the coordinates.
Yeah,
I think there's like a math error and there's like a precision error.
it should be a jitter when they first show up. They don't actually align when they first show up.
And the problems happen when particle systems get further away from the origin. So in the game now, some of the directional particles kind of go crazy because the player is generally not anywhere near the world origin.
Yeah, that sounds like there's some math problems. So that feature was never
So yeah, it's
really finished.
yeah, it kind of works, but just a few kinks need to be ironed out. It's kind of a sub request under the alignment. But the other thing which would be kind of neat is some way to specify where on a sprite the pivot point is, or where especially for like velocity particles, like you generally want it to stretch this way, like away from the head. But sometimes you want it to stretch from the tail.
Versus having to shift your image
Yeah.
over to
Yeah.
to the
Would
center.
you want that to be on a per image stack level or on a per particle level?
Probably an image stack, I think. I mean,
What about particles that circle the player, like a something that zooms around the player and creates a beam of light or something like that?
like a trail. Yeah, that's is that what you're talking about?
Did you hear Cross?
Was that like a trail, a ribbon? Was that what you
No, not necessarily a trail. You could create something just by emitting a bunch of particles that look like a ring, like a donut around the player.
Oh,
Right, and then you'd be aligning particles X to their emitter Z, I think, in that case. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's too late in the day for me to think about coordinates too much.
Aligning to velocity would work for those as long as the emitter was controlling the velocity to make them fly around the character, I think.
Yeah. But what if they were just coming out and staying in place?
I don't know. We'd have to have some
I think it's aligned to the
offset. We'd have to have an offset to arbitrary axis alignment.
I'm gonna say it's. I think this will fall out of the math in the system because every particle does have 3 direction vectors attached to it, and also 3 direction vectors attached to its parent, and a couple other things. So particles are heavier than I would like, but yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, then number 3 was ribbon particles. I threw that in just because I think they would serve double duty as for generalized effects and possibly for weapon trails and things like that when needed.
So I've always had a plan for how ribbon particles would fit in,
Okay.
Which was that we would set up a particle system itself to just emit particles, but because the child particles of an emitter are all in one linked list, we define it as this emitter, this linked list of child particles is itself a ribbon.
Right.
And so what we do is for each particle along that, instead of having it generate its own sprite, it aligns its sprite to the children before and after it,
So right.
and actually stretches to it.
So it stitches them together.
Yeah. So the first particle just, each particle. What you do is each particle is going to say, all right, what's the vector to me, and then just do a screen space alignment based on that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you have a particle here, and you have a particle here, and you have a particle here, and you have a particle here. As this thing here, this head has moved along, emitting this and this and this and this and this. And so you just be like, all right, well, here's the axis here, here's the axis here, here's the axis here, because it's pretty much align it to the 2 on each side.
Are we going to allow the ribbon to twist, or is it always going to be screen space, or is it going to be
The alignment's more complicated for the ribbon, so it'll be limited into what looks good, I think.
Yeah, I think
Because
I mean, I definitely could see Cross wanting to always align this to vertical Z or have a ribbon that coils around my hand like this.
yeah,
You know, where like the ribbon itself is always parallel to me, or parallel like that, or like I can. George totally cannot see, so I can see Cross wanting a ribbon that does like this kind of thing, where all right, it's around my hand, but it's always aligned to that. So.
I mean, just as long as there are a few options, it doesn't have to be terribly fancy, but just there are some cases where you want a ribbon, but you want it to be more in a flat plane or something that's more like a conical kind of effect, where it's not necessarily totally screen spacing, that screen facing.
Yeah.
Like that.
So I'm gonna grab the George cam and just like so here is just like particle, just child particle as this head has moved along, and at each point along here you can infer one axis just from like take my previous and post sibling and draw a line between them, and then take a line perpendicular to that, and then that by itself. So here's this, here's the next particle, here's the next particle, here's the next particle, and what we'd want to be doing is using some kind of sprite that's edge to edge on that.
Yeah.
It would be up to me to.
This is going to look good with any two arbitrary axes as the alignment, one of the axes being the direction of the ribbon and the other one being like camera facing.
Yeah.
As long as those axes are far apart, like 90 degrees is ideal.
Could be world Z, could be local body part Z, or something relative to the emitter.
Speaking of which, can this
Can you make a spiral
concept,
staircase out of this? Yes.
can we get like a lightsaber light trails out of the same thing? Can we attach these to objects in the world?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I would say that is something that's going to sit outside the VFX system proper, and that's the other side of things I wanted to talk about here. But let's talk about, which is having a way to feed things like this is on a weapon. How big is the weapon?
Right. Yeah, that kind of comes into number 5, the expressions. Some way, I will need all kinds of ways to get data from the world and from whoever into the VFX system somehow.
So I see the system here. So yeah, way to do. Okay, well, number 4, doing in and out transitions for VFX, which I think is a no-brainer. As I'm building client side ability skill stuff right now, I'm wanting that very much myself.
Yeah, the way I was envisioning it was right now, particle system, long list of numbers that I put in, and then I could just basically, for some fields if necessary, define like, well, this has an in and this has an out, and assume that the part in the middle is the looping part.
Right.
So it plays continuously until it needs to quit, and then it plays the outs.
Yeah, that is just an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
I also need to better define, like, this particle is like, there's not necessarily a clear message up above the system level of what is and is not looping. So that's on the tech side of, is this fire and forget, or is this something that we want to turn on and then manually turn off?
Yeah, right now the server dictates everything. So a lot of the effects I have themselves play as looping effects, and I just rely on the ability system to say, okay, start, and then when it's done, the effect dies out automatically on its own.
Yeah, but we definitely want things that are just poof on.
Yeah.
And the server says, now you turn off, and at that point it advances to it advances to the last number in the list.
Yeah.
You need a a way to specify which sections are the central looping part.
Yeah.
Do you have a timeline? Are we going to have a timeline in the particle editor?
No.
Do we want a timeline, or would that, like, I feel like
Does
what we have is, if a technical person is using it, what we have is probably faster than dragging a timeline.
Yeah, at the moment, I don't really see a need for it, but
Let's us specify loops easily, though.
Lets us what?
Specify loops easily.
the only, yeah, well, that's what I'm saying right now. Like, if I just have an in and an out, I can assume that any system that I make just loops. And then if that parameter has an out, then it uses it. And so all we need to know is like how long does it take for it to end. So it comes in for a set amount of time, it loops until the server says it doesn't need to play anymore, and then all the stuff which has an out, it just plays the out for that.
Right, but it's a little more complicated than that. Like, just on the creation side, like, what if, what if you set up loops for some values and not for other values? What does that mean? How does the looping and not looping part interact?
Well,
How do you combine different animations in the same effect? Such as a fire starting and then turning into smoke. That sort of thing. Is that possible now?
Yeah, you can do that. That is doable.
yeah, not in the same effect per se, right? Well,
But it couldn't be a looping effect. Like, you basically have to define a non-looping effect with a duration on it. You could do it where just, the smoke emitter ramped down and the fire emitter ramped up over time. Then, you.
yeah. Well, we don't really have the concept of an effect per se right now. We have particles which play, but we don't have, like, here is a whole set of particles which play as an effect, which combine together to form an effect. It's just like it's one thing. It's one unit of
Right.
particles.
But you could build a particle system. You can build a particle system that emits other particles that emits other particles.
Yes.
And you could build a single particle system that is not looping, that spits out, starts out emitting lots of smoke particles, and the emitter for the smoke particles animates down over time, and the emitter for the fire particles animates up over time. We don't have a way to, procedurally control stuff within that kind of thing.
Can't label a chunk of the timeline and say, this is what happens when you douse the fire with the water effect.
Right. That would need to become something different somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking for the most simple, non-editory dependent kind of thing we can do for that. I'll probably have to get back to you on it. I did put some thought into it, but right now I really can't remember all the things about it.
Okay, not a problem.
Just thinking about it. But I did actually put some thought into how we would do that.
Okay.
I don't think it should be.
Oh,
It shouldn't be too complicated.
We can iterate a couple times on this, but this is definitely one where, it's the, like you've got like the red parameter going, it's just set at 20, 80, 30. The blue is set at 0, and here's a looping section, 150, back and forth, and then it flashes to ultra bright blue at the end on the out of the loop. And what does the total particle do with that? And that's the part I'm not sure of.
Yeah, I think can solve it in a fairly simple way, but again, mine is clear earlier in the day. So.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll sleep on this one. George, you're giving this a confused look. Are you familiar with the ultra-fast, ultra-light particle system?
I'm not really familiar with our current particle system.
Okay. It's basically, there's a set of parameters that are just, they're just lists of numbers, or alternately lists of ranges. It could be 80 to 100 if you wanted it to. And particle spawns, and it, over its lifetime, it just cycles through all of those numbers. And, it interpolates between them. And, the editor is just, it's basically a quick little text file with a slightly nicer interface wrapped around it. It's very quick and dirty, but it's worked.
Are we keeping that system? If it does everything we need to do.
I mean, obviously, if it needed everything that we need, if it did everything we wanted.
I actually don't mind the simplicity of it. I would prefer something which is more bare bones in the way it's presented for me to edit it, but allowed me a lot more power than something which had a really fancy editor, which had all kinds of knobs and levers to pull, which was more complicated to use. So I really don't mind the very bare bones, I enter numbers thing aspect.
The SV editor.
Yeah, because that I think makes it easier to add more of the parameters and the expressions and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think this being able to add in little expressions to this is the good thing, but we just need to figure out exactly what does defining a looping subsection look like in this system. And if you define a looping subsection for one thing, do you have to define the loops for everything, or what does it mean?
You could put go-tos in the comma list.
Yeah, I mean, inherently, it's the problem being that there's not really keyframes. Or each parameter has individual keyframes. So,
yeah.
Oh, you'd need a way to tag a specific thing across all parameters. I see what you're saying.
Right. It could be, but I think this is a solvable problem. It's just not a super easy solvable problem.
Well, we could make sub effects or something that could be referenced from the other parameters, and the sub effects could loop or not. And then they're just a separate list of values, and we plug the name of that in instead of the value, and it uses the whatever values from that for that parameter.
Could work.
Yeah. Like I said, I'll look at my notes again and get back to you. So I did put some thought into it, but right now I just can't really.
I've been thinking about this same problem, because it's so obvious that we need to have particle systems both that that have a finite in and out and a duration that I can stretch.
Yeah. Yeah. My basic idea, and I don't know if this will work for everything, was just that we always assume particle systems loop, like in some way or another. They're always going to be doing a continual thing. And then all we need to do is say when they start and when they end. And when we say it ends, then all tracks or all parameters which have an out value go toward that value until it ends.
And everything else, just anything that doesn't have an out value, just plays along
continues
its loop.
Continues the way it was.
Yeah. Could work. And we'd want to specify what's an out time for the system.
Right. Yeah, that's the only thing we need to know, how long it takes for it to get out.
In time, out time, and
You're looking at the very edge of the frame for that camera.
that camera.
He switches back and forth and stuff, but that's the big background.
Okay. Now trying to focus on VFX and not be camera conscious.
Just let you know.
I'm
You were off camera.
I'm good at being oblivious.
Don't make it that easy.
No, it's the key to not having stage fright is just completely forget, that there is an audience and just care about Mike.
It's all about.
Mike, all I do is care about you.
I know, Tyler.
Okay, so
All right. Keep going.
so expressions. I think we've already talked that one to death.
Pretty much. By expressions, I don't really know what that means now because in light of rehabilitation, but all I'm asking for is somewhere, somehow, if I can get useful numbers into the effects system. And however that happens, I don't care. Just as long as there is some way for me to access useful numbers so that what you see reflects what's happening in the game.
Right.
Without having to
In a
guess
useful
over and over
way.
and over and over and over.
Just so, mainly for gameplay purposes, just so you know this is more powerful, this just happened,
Right.
Things like that.
We need to have a power parameter, and ideally, I'd like to see that turned into. Well, I'm gonna come over here. So we need the power in there, the heat, various things. They're just sort of like bag of numbers.
Yeah.
Size of player. I would also add to that, we definitely have particles where we need to, get the size of the weapon it is attached to. Also,
Distance from the camera.
also more spawn types. Like I would really like something that will spawn off of like the hitboxes of a character. Not that we
Right,
have
yeah.
hitboxes,
Right. Yeah.
but just things that would come off my skin,
Yeah.
or at least my skeleton.
Just somewhere where data is stored, which is fairly accurate for that, even if it's faked, if it's all cylinders or something like that. Just as long as Scott changes something, that changes the data, which defines those volumes on the body parts of the character, and then that's all kind of seamlessly passed in the particles. Behind the scenes, I just say I want this body part to do this, and then
It spawns off of it spawns off of whatever. Like we just say what it's attached to, and
You should be able to get all the body parts.
we have that.
and then it
Can
gives
we name bones currently?
What?
Can we name bones currently?
we do.
We
so
have
have like a list of them.
we have a canonical bone naming with an enumeration called bone alias.
Yeah. Right now, what I do is I fake it totally. I've just gone into the game and I know the bone name. I attach the particle system to it, and I just play with it until it's aligned. Because some of our bones aren't actually in the middle of the flesh, so I have to offset the particles a bit so that, say for instance, they play around the forearm or something like that.
I get you. You need to have a lot of this.
Because the forearm's actually at the elbow.
Yeah, exactly.
We might want to have custom bones just for the particles that actually do align in the middle or positions we can attach things to.
Just check out the bone aliasing. It's a huge thing. Part of this question is like slightly higher level than particles. Where does attachment data come from? Is that something we want to embed in the particle and VFX stuff, or is that something that should live with client skill depth, or both?
We probably need either or, right?
Yeah.
I want high skill, so maybe override it and specify it, and then otherwise particles apply that.
Sorry, what, Dave?
Maybe I guess the good idea of have like client spec just like override that versus having a particle just define it. Like so, if you apply the particles themselves, they'll be able to define where they go unless the client spec says no, play it here instead. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. So client skill depth overrides it, but
Especially if it's something that needs to change.
And in relation to attaching things to weapons, like knowing the size of weapons, like you said, having some kind of thing in the editor which just allowed us to define points on a weapon when we define the weapon itself to say, like, here's the start of the blade, here's the end of the blade.
Yeah.
And that's just stored somewhere, and then that data goes with the weapon. And when I refer to that weapon, I just automatically know when I touch the blade, it's going to be this length, or it gives me that length back, say. Somehow I just get a number, and I can adjust the particles to do whatever fancy thing I want.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and the key
Definitely
thing being
have
that,
it come off the edge of the blade, not the entire weapon.
yeah,
It's
or something like that.
that's a real thing.
The key thing being that it's data which is stored with the weapon, which doesn't have to be another phone that is in the world. It's just
Right.
this is just raw data which is stored somewhere that I can access.
Well, if we can store stuff on weapon, we can store stuff on anything. So
Yeah.
armor and stuff like that, so you don't have to
Yeah,
re-import those arbitrary numbers because
well, or
Yeah. But armor gets turned in, just sort of gets turned into the
Oh.
polygon soup of a character.
I realized you could say that.
You'd have some sort of per equipment constants that you can just edit in a spreadsheet. It would be a really hard way of doing it, but you could attach an arbitrary number of values. Sword.
This one may end up being outside the scope of what we can deliver and ship the game on time.
Sure.
I hate to say it.
the weapon thing is the important thing for me, because I think more effects are going to be in the weapons probably. But
From what I said about the armor, though, the armor doesn't actually have to be part of it. Really, only the nearest bone needs to be part of it. And then the only problem would be is if we had specific sets of armor. Okay, I'm talking myself out of it.
Yeah. Let's table this one, I
yeah,
think.
that's fine.
So, timing-wise, Dave, you are the one with the most open schedule.
That was the plan.
That is the plan. Okay. So all of this is going to come to you. You got good notes?
Yep, not too big.
Okay.
I got secondary notes.
And we have a video record too.
Oh, yeah,
That's true.
So we'll go back and watch the Twitch stream. So anyone else concerns out of this meeting?
Is there anything having to do with abilities specifically that we need to load?
I don't think so.
Not yet.
No. So now I'm going to go over to the Twitch stream and see if anyone's actually watching it and give them a chance to interject.
I have some thoughts maybe should be said. Are we going to use the same particle systems for doing things like rain, dust storms, snow effects, or are these going to be one-off GPU particles?
We currently do use it for the same thing. We currently do use it for rain and snow. I think, Dave, you made a system that just sort of,
It just sponsors one of them.
is it attached to the camera?
Currently, it's just attached to
Okay, yeah, we probably want to keep it in world space and just have a box attached to the camera that just, we wrap the particles to that.
It is in a box. It's directional particles in a box in front of the camera. Sorry, in front of the camera, sort of, but it's based off the camera's position.
We need something that also cools to the box that's visible for something like this.
Yeah,
Is this why when you turn abruptly, all the rain goes sideways?
Fades them in the distance, that sort of thing. It's a
yeah,
kind
that's
of a
I
different
think
problem.
that's better because we can, like, you should, the way to do that is just like, it's a particle system that's just generally running and it's in world space, but there's a box that is tied to the camera and the particles wrap within that box.
Yeah, it kind of does that now because you did add a wrapping feature for volumes. So
Yeah.
particles which go off one axis just automatically come
Right,
back
but that just, the box itself needs to move in world space, but not
right.
the particles.
Yeah, you're revealing the particle system. It's like the box is a window into the world of particles.
Yeah, you can think of the particles as a 3D texture, and you're just
Yes.
that's
Yep.
bound in world
You're
space,
just
and you're
moving
sliding
through it.
a box through it.
Yes.
That's a good way of doing it.
That's what I was.
And that way, you can just put the camera down and go straight through it, and you see the snow coming through you,
Yeah.
and that's always looks super, super awesome.
Should we have the option to do GPU iterating of the particle systems?
We don't. That would be an entirely new particle system.
Yeah.
That would be which reuses absolutely nothing from the current code.
I think it's totally unnecessary on PC, but
Yeah, I think, like looking at all the data we have, it's pretty much on sane systems we're GPU bound.
Yeah.
Someone can always put a Titan and a Celeron and end up CPU bound, but like for reasonably sane and balanced systems, we're GPU bound. So we have CPU to burn on doing particles.
which means we don't have to solve the hard problems like coming up with a height map of all the terrain for the GPU to use.
Yeah.
Actually, do we do particle collision right now in the current system?
Nope.
Okay. Are we gonna?
Probably not. I think that's going to be one of those things that does not scale nicely to 1,000 players in one battle, all firing their effects at each other.
Totally agreed.
But also because the system flattens all the particles into one mesh and batches them, having rain and all through the same system gives us the ability to have the rain that's in front of the glowy shield and the rain that's behind the glowy shield.
Yes.
So that's neat. Okay.
Like a random chat question that popped up.
Sure. What do we got, Tyler?
I can't parse it. Totalvic, can't you describe the functions of the effect within the individual file names in an ordered manner so that they can be referenced directly or imported automatically into a grid, etc.? Create a file name constructor interface.
Ideally, that's what the importer would do, right? It would look at a series of named ones followed by 001 and separate each one with the same name into its own unique set.
Talking about the image set. Yeah. That's what directory, import this directory as an image set would do. I'm not sure if he is talking about an image set.
Maybe.
But the more complicated things like how the particle system has evolved are edited elsewhere.
Yeah, this thing fades from white to red over its lifetime is a long ass list of parameters that ultimately this entire system design is something I ripped off from Sean Craig, the lead programmer of WildStar, when he and I were both working together at Troika on Temple of Elemental Evil. So yeah. This particle system has history.
Speaking of looping, one thing we'll have to talk about in another meeting too is the way looping actually works now.
Yes, I agree. We need to think more deeply about looping.
Totalvic says, yep, an image set, but you could also include pointers to further effects.
Yes, although we don't actually keep particle effects themselves in text files. That is database driven. So they end up we never actually export particles as raw text files. Although, yeah, that we could. So there are pointers between them, but they're just not, I've learned the hard way that wrangling hundreds and thousands of tiny little XML files can be the path to madness.
Online.
Yeah, or the Warhammer character art system. That was not an artist-friendly kind of thing. That was
While you're in there, maybe you'll catch the bug where, I don't know if it has anything to do with the effects or if it has to do with lights. I think it has to do with lights where I don't know if you remember from months ago, if not a year ago, on a lower graphics card when your frame rate really dipped, you'd see lights rip across the screen that were attached to particles.
Oh, you're talking about the when they respawned or died, like so set times. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, it's just let's remember that.
He's talking about there's a certain case where if your frame rate got low enough, there's lights attached to particles that are averaged, and if a particle is far enough away, the average light position will stutter across places.
right.
Which can cause odd-looking streaky lights.
Yeah, Michelle had a pretty low-end card at the time, and she was able to just get screenshots of these little guys whipping across the screen. And then conspiracy theorists were figuring they were alien ships.
They were.
Yeah. the amount of like explanation that I've seen people come up with for things that are, you know, just artifact programming.
Oh
is
yeah.
hilarious.
Took a picture. Oh, that's not.
Anyone else in Twitch amused by our particle conversation?
Ear Chug asks, particle systems are always said to be a heavy systems. How is CU getting away with having a lot of particles on the screen from many players at once?
It's number one, the system design comes from you know, circa 15 years ago, so it's a, you know, stupid light efficient kind of system, even if it's not the most, you know, it doesn't look very much like the particles you would make in Unity or Max or something, but it does look, it gets the job done. You know, it's we have benchmarked this up into millions of particles active at a time, and it's not killed anything. So
Okay.
Yeah, the
So-
main thing is that it batches.
yeah, it a couple of really clever things. All the particle systems themselves are able to be processed independently as part of just the massive update all renderables thing, so which is 100% concurrent. And then they all fold together into one sorting list, which gets sorted, and you know, the particles themselves can fold together into a very small number of batches that get drawn. So we're not, you know, paying a lot of overhead on communication with the GPU there. That's also, you know, that also gives us like this really clever part to, you know, do things like how ribbons should be connected if we, you know, do get that right someday.
Okay.
So,
Good.
I mean, the scale's a lot better with number of players and number of particle effects than a traditional system where each particle effect is an additional draw call.
yeah, and that's, you know, that's the obvious way to do it, and it's dumb because like then it's not even possible to have like fire and smoke that, you know, you have a bunch of fire and a bunch of smokes coming out of it, and that doesn't, like, the smoke and the fire don't even sort right relative to each other, even though they're basically one effect. And
Yeah, sorting is one of the biggest things of
yeah,
effects, like trying to get the stuff to work.
No. That's the easy stuff, right?
and the sorting here just magically works. So
All right. So
All
we're
right.
good. And George, I'm going to route Dave through you on this stuff.
and you know, we'll pull in Bull for some editor support on particles too, just on how to set up image sets.
Ideally, what I would really like, I don't know how hard this is going to be, would be that if I could import the images directly into the particle editor without having to go through the usual import step of through the, you know, when you normally have to import an image into the system and then into a texture and all that, if they could kind of magically work behind the scenes.
Yeah, point it at just a directory of TGAs or pings or something.
Yeah,
So just auto generate.
Yeah.
And then magically go to the server.
Yeah. Also, I'll say requirements on this. If we can pre-compress the textures in the build pipeline, and then at the atlasing stage, instead of rendering those textures into the atlas, if you can just use a compute shader or a sub-resource copy or something to just take the compressed blocks and blast them directly in, instead of, please don't go through the rendering pipeline and end up with uncompressed, like take our compressed texture and don't decompress it and generate an uncompressed texture. Because it's not, I mean, the memory usage itself is not a big thing. The memory bandwidth of pulling in textures, that will be a bottleneck on particle rendering speed for us. So being able to have the particle textures compressed means much less memory bandwidth to render particles, which means that particles run faster.
Yep.
Yeah, we get that working also. Characters are heavy, please. I think George and I actually talked about that briefly a while back.
Yeah, we definitely want to be able to keep the particle textures compressed.
Yeah, we have to do it the same way we're currently doing materials, where we bake them out from build server into compressed textures. We can use the most efficient compression then, BC7 or whatever.
Right. And then we can just take the BC7 directly, and that's different from the character art, because we want to apply tints and other effects to it. We don't really have and we want to, decal in things that have variable outlines, and we're not just bringing over entire blocks. Like in that case, we do have to go through the actual rasterization stage. But for this, we can keep the particles compressed the entire way through.
For the characters, we can real-time compress to BC1. There's a lot of code out there demonstrating compute shaders or real-time CPU compression to BC1.
Yeah, I would do that.
You can do that with BC7.
Yeah, or the BC3 style, where the id trick of turn it into YCOCG and then pull the Y out to the alpha channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, none of these are perfect, but they're better than uncompressed.
Yes.
Especially since we've already incurred the artifacts rendering them once compressed to the atlas or to the big character image.
Yeah, well, I've actually been thinking about, this is totally off topic, but I've been thinking about character textures. If maybe what we actually want to do with character textures is compress them with some non-block format like BPG or WebP or something, and then just bring them in that hyper compressed format, decompress them once and spit that out to video memory, and then render that, and then
we'd make better quality out of that. In fact, we'd probably make some savings if we were to do the CPU side in a low priority background thread, rather than doing it on the GPU and interrupting the GPU potentially whenever someone changes their equipment. But on the other hand, if we bring it in a block compressed format that we understand really well, we can have the shader basically copy the blocks directly and swizzle them in cases where two overlap, just come up with an average palette and output them again.
Yeah, that's actually how Warhammer worked, because it would just take when you had an entire BC1 block that you wanted to tint, and the tint mask covered the entire block. It would just copy the entire block and tint the two endpoints within the block. And so a lot of times Warhammer could, it could generate most of a tinted character texture without ever doing things, and really only where there was the tint mask had an edge that ran through a block did it have to pay the price of compressing and decompressing.
Your only real problem is edge aliasing, and honestly, you could get away by just selecting the most common colors between the endpoints, and it loses some color detail on the edges. But 4x4 blocks are small enough that you're not going to notice those in real life.
Yeah, except Mark noticed.
Yeah.
Mark, I think it was you. How you wanted a special uncompressed textures mode for the character art textures on the character select screen.
Yeah, I can see that. We should probably do that too if we have some sort of tinting editor, run the whole thing uncompressed through the HTML interface rather than,
I'm gonna wrap you guys up.
All right.
Movie time. You made a big list of things to do.
Yeah. All right.
Huh?
Yeah, it's 6 o'clock.
Yeah, that's why actually it's about 10 after
All right.
6. So
George, I'm turning you
George, bye.
Hey folks, so that was the VFX meeting. I hope you enjoyed joining us. We're going to be turning off the stream now as the meeting is over and people are doing other stuff. So join us tomorrow for Morning with Max, Office Stream, Procedural Materials with Mike, Lunchtime Throwdown board game, and of course the end of week wrap up with MJ. So we've got a full day of streaming tomorrow, or a pretty full day, and we hope to see you there. So thanks a lot, and see you next time. So we've got a full day of streaming tomorrow, or a pretty full day, and we hope to see you there. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.